Today, we're diving into a spiritual truth that was hidden for over 2,000 years, a revelation so powerful that it was deliberately buried beneath layers of religious doctrine and institutional control. This isn't just another motivational message or positive thinking technique. This is about understanding the fundamental spiritual laws that govern how miracles actually work, the same laws that Jesus himself demonstrated, not to show you how special he was, but to reveal what you're capable of accessing right now, in this very moment. Have you ever wondered why your prayers for miracles seem to hit a ceiling? As if there's an invisible barrier between you and the divine breakthrough you're desperately seeking. You've prayed with all your heart. You've believed with everything you have. You've followed every religious instruction perfectly, yet the miracle you need remains frustratingly out of reach. What if I told you that the very way you've been taught to pray is actually preventing the miracle from manifesting in your life? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's what most people don't realize. Every time you pray for a miracle, you're actually reinforcing the very consciousness that blocks it from appearing. Stay with me here, because this is going to challenge everything you've been taught in Sunday school. When you beg God for healing, when you plead for financial breakthrough, when you desperately petition for a relationship to be restored, you're operating from what spiritual teachers call a consciousness of lack. You're affirming through your very prayer that you don't have what you need, that you're separate from the divine source, that you're powerless and dependent on an external force to grant you favor. Joel Goldsmith, a spiritual teacher who spent 5 decades unlocking the mysteries of Christ consciousness, discovered something that religious institutions have worked tirelessly to keep hidden. He found that Jesus never intended to be the only miracle worker, standing as an unreachable divine figure that you worship from a distance. Instead, Jesus came to demonstrate a spiritual technology, a way of aligning with divine reality that every human being has access to. Has this ever happened to you? You've prayed fervently for something, only to watch it remain unchanged while wondering what you're doing wrong? The problem isn't your faith. The problem isn't God's willingness. The problem is that you've been taught a method of prayer that actually contradicts the spiritual laws Jesus was teaching. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he wasn't being poetic. When he promised that you will do greater works than these, he wasn't exaggerating. He was revealing that Christ consciousness, the state of awareness where miracles flow naturally, isn't something he possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's your birthright, your true nature, available to you right now. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because it completely inverts everything traditional religion has taught about prayer, miracles, and your relationship with the divine. The shift from praying for miracles to receiving them instantly isn't about praying harder or believing more intensely. It's about understanding the fundamental difference between two completely opposite approaches to the divine. Think about every prayer you've ever prayed when you desperately needed a miracle. You probably started by acknowledging your unworthiness, confessing your sins, reminding God of your failures, and then begging for intervention. This is what I call beggar consciousness, and it's been programmed into you since childhood through every religious institution that benefits from keeping you spiritually dependent. Here's the hidden truth that changes everything. When you pray from a position of lack, you're not demonstrating faith. You're actually declaring to the universe that you don't have what you need. You're affirming separation. You're reinforcing the very condition you're trying to escape. Every word of petition is telling your consciousness, I am incomplete, I am broken, I am separate from divine. supply, and consciousness, being the creative force that it is, immediately goes to work, manifesting more evidence of exactly what you're declaring. This is why people can pray for decades and see minimal results. It's not because God is withholding. It's not because you haven't suffered enough or proven yourself worthy. It's because the very mechanism you're using, petition prayer, creates the opposite consciousness of what you're seeking. Joel Goldsmith spent years unraveling this mystery, and what he discovered was revolutionary. True prayer isn't about asking at all. True prayer is about recognition. It's about aligning your awareness with what already exists in spiritual reality. If you're ready for spiritual truths that actually transform your life, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more here that will shift how you experience reality. Let me make this practical for you. When someone is sick and you pray for their healing, traditional religion teaches you to beg God to intervene and fix the disease. But here's what's really happening in that moment. You're acknowledging the disease as real and powerful. You're affirming that God is separate from the person, and you're positioning yourself as powerless to do anything but hope an external force shows mercy. Every part of that equation reinforces the problem rather than dissolving it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this paradigm shift, because understanding the difference between praying to Jesus and praying from Christ consciousness is literally the key that unlocks everything. Most people have been taught to worship Jesus as a distant deity, someone infinitely above you who occasionally grants favors if you grovel convincingly enough. But that's not what Jesus taught at all. He never once said, "Worship me and stay small." He said, "Follow me," meaning learn what I learned, do what I'm doing, access what I'm accessing. He promised you would do greater works than he did, not greater prayers to him, but greater demonstrations of the same consciousness he embodied. This is the transformation that religion doesn't want you to experience, because awakened people don't need institutional intermediaries. When you recognize that Christ consciousness isn't exclusive to Jesus, but is actually your true nature, everything shifts. You're no longer a beggar hoping for divine intervention. You're a divine being remembering who you really are. The miracles don't come from outside, they emerge from within. As you align with spiritual truth, this journey from separation to recognition is where the real power lives, and it's available to you right now, not someday when you've earned it. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this shift," if this revelation is landing in your spirit. So how does this actually work when you're facing a real crisis? Let's say you receive a devastating medical diagnosis, or your bank account is empty, or a relationship you cherish is falling apart. Your immediate human response is to panic and start bargaining with God, making promises about who you'll become if only this situation gets fixed. But that entire approach keeps you locked in the consciousness that attracted the problem in the first place. Here's the practical application that Joel Goldsmith taught after decades of proving this works in real-world situations. When confronting illness, you don't pretend the symptoms aren't there. You're not denying reality or engaging in magical thinking. Instead, you're making a radical decision about what you consider to be ultimate reality. You acknowledge that yes, the body is showing symptoms, but you refuse to give those symptoms the final word about your spiritual identity. You recognize that in the realm of pure consciousness, in the invisible spiritual reality that underlies all physical appearance, there is no disease. There is no limitation. There is only wholeness, perfection, and infinite supply. This isn't about repeating affirmations until you convince yourself. It's about resting in a truth that exists whether you believe it or not. As you settle into that awareness, as you stop fighting the appearance and simply recognize what's true in spirit, something extraordinary begins to happen. The body starts reflecting the consciousness you're holding, not because you forced it through willpower, but because physical form always follows consciousness. This is spiritual law, not religious hope. The transformation happens from the inside out, which is why external manipulation never produces lasting results. You can't think your way into a miracle while holding a consciousness of lack. You can access a miracle the moment you recognize that in your true spiritual identity, the problem never existed in the first place. Now let me reveal something about the cross that will completely shift how you understand suffering and redemption. Everything you've been taught about why Jesus died is designed to keep you in perpetual guilt and dependency. The traditional narrative says God was so angry about humanity's sin that he required a blood sacrifice, and Jesus took the punishment you deserved. That story makes God into a vengeful tyrant and you into a condemned criminal who can only escape through someone else's suffering. But that's not what the cross demonstrates at all. Jesus wasn't paying off an angry deity. He was proving that even death itself has no power over consciousness. He went through the ultimate human fear, physical death, and emerged on the other side to show you that your true identity is indestructible. You are not this temporary body that experiences pain, aging, and eventual dissolution. You are eternal consciousness, having a temporary human experience. This completely transforms how you relate to every form of suffering. When challenges arise, you're not being punished by a judgmental God. You're not being tested to prove your worthiness. You're simply experiencing the outpicturing, the external manifestation of whatever consciousness you've been holding. Change the consciousness, and the experience must change, because the external world has no choice but to reflect your internal state. This is the hidden truth behind every spiritual teaching, the mechanics of how reality actually operates. Drop a comment saying, "Consciousness creates," if this perspective is opening new doors for you. Let me share a real story that demonstrates exactly how this shift from petition to recognition works in practice. Margaret was given a terminal diagnosis that doctors labeled incurable. She did everything traditional religion teaches. She attended healing services, had elders lay hands on her, fasted, confessed every sin she could remember, and spent hours begging Jesus to intervene. Month after month, nothing changed. Her body continued deteriorating, and despair was replacing hope. When she finally encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching, she was at the end of her rope, willing to try anything. Joel looked at her with compassion and said something that initially shocked her. Stop praying for healing and start recognizing wholeness. For 3 weeks, Margaret practiced a completely different approach. Every morning, instead of cataloging her symptoms to God, she sat in silence and recognized a simple truth. In spirit, there is no disease. She didn't deny her pain or pretend the symptoms weren't real. She simply refused to give them ultimate authority over her. Spiritual identity. The transformation didn't happen overnight like some charismatic miracle story. It unfolded gradually as her consciousness shifted. First, the fear dissolved. Then the pain began to lessen. Within 2 months, her doctors were baffled to find no trace of what they'd declared incurable. But here's what's crucial to understand. Margaret didn't get healed in the traditional sense. She recognized she'd never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the change in consciousness. This is how spiritual law operates, consistently and predictably, once you understand the mechanics behind it. Now let me tell you about Robert, because his journey reveals something equally powerful about how consciousness shapes every area of life, not just health. Robert was a successful businessman who'd built his empire through aggressive competition and ruthless strategy. He believed success required struggle, that you had to fight for every advantage and crush your competitors. Then overnight, his entire business collapsed. Partners betrayed him, investments failed catastrophically, and he lost everything he'd spent years building. Desperate and broken, Robert found his way to Joel's teaching, and what he learned shattered his entire worldview. Joel showed him that his consciousness of struggle and competition had attracted exactly what he feared most: loss and betrayal. The external collapse was simply mirroring his internal state. Robert made a decision. That seemed crazy to everyone around him. Instead of immediately scrambling to rebuild through the same aggressive tactics, he spent 6 months practicing what Joel called living from grace instead of law. Every single morning, Robert sat in meditation, recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. He didn't visualize specific amounts of money. He didn't create elaborate business plans. He didn't network or scheme. He simply rested in the awareness that infinite supply exists in consciousness, and he allowed that awareness to guide his actions. The rebuilding took 2 full years, not 2 weeks, because real transformation happens at the pace consciousness shifts. But what emerged was radically different from what had collapsed. Robert created a business founded on cooperation instead of competition, on genuine service instead of exploitation. He prospered beyond his previous success, but this time from a completely different internal foundation. These aren't isolated anomalies or lucky coincidences. They're demonstrations of spiritual law, operating exactly as it's designed to operate when you align with it instead of fighting against it through petition and struggle. Comment: my consciousness is shifting if you're beginning to see how this applies to your specific situation. What Margaret and Robert discovered is what Joel called the practice of presence. And it's fundamentally different from every form of prayer you've been taught. Traditional prayer is you talking at God, presenting your wish list, explaining your problems, and hoping someone's listening. But real spiritual practice is the exact opposite. It's becoming silent enough to listen. It's recognizing that the presence you've been seeking outside yourself is actually the essence of who you are. Think about what happens in your mind during a typical prayer session. You're rehearsing problems, listing needs, describing lack, and essentially having a one-sided conversation with a God you imagine is somewhere far away. Joel discovered that this entire approach misses the point completely. When you truly grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, not something separate you need to access through proper technique, everything shifts. You stop asking for things because you begin receiving the awareness of what already exists in the invisible realm of spirit. This is where most people struggle, because we've been conditioned to believe that spiritual practice requires effort, discipline, and constant doing. But the practice of presence is about releasing effort, not increasing it. It's about recognizing what's already true, rather than trying to make something become true. Everything you've been desperately seeking outside yourself, peace, abundance, healing, love, exists right now in consciousness. Your only work is to recognize it, accept it as already present, and watch as the external world rearranges itself to match what you're holding in awareness. If this shifted something in your awareness, hit that like button. It helps these teachings reach others who are searching for answers beyond traditional religion. Now, this leads to something even more radical that Joel taught, something he called recognizing the nothingness of error. When a problem appears in your life, your immediate instinct is to fight it, fix it, or pray for its removal. You treat the problem as a real, powerful force that needs to be defeated. But Joel discovered through decades of demonstration that this approach actually empowers the very thing you're trying to eliminate. Every time you fight a problem, you're declaring it has power. Every time you pray for its removal, you're affirming it as real and threatening. Instead, the practice is recognizing that in spiritual reality, the problem doesn't exist. Not because you're pretending or engaging in denial, but because consciousness is the only actual cause, and problems exist only in the realm of appearance, not in the realm of truth. Let me make this concrete. You face a financial crisis, bank account empty, bills overdue. Your natural response is panic, followed by petition prayer, begging God to send money. But that entire approach keeps you locked in lack consciousness, constantly affirming that you don't have enough. The practice Joel taught is radically different. You acknowledge the appearance of the empty bank account without giving it ultimate authority. You recognize that in spirit, in the realm of consciousness where everything originates, there is no lack. Infinite supply exists right now, always has, always will. As you rest in that recognition, as you refuse to empower the appearance of lack by fighting it or fearing it, your consciousness shifts from scarcity to abundance. And here's the key: circumstances must reflect whatever consciousness you're holding. Not might reflect, must reflect. This is spiritual law operating with the same consistency as gravity. This practice requires a level of spiritual maturity that goes beyond technique. You're learning to hold two realities simultaneously: the appearance you're seeing and the truth that exists in consciousness, while giving ultimate authority only to truth. Drop truth over appearance in the comments if you're ready to practice this level of spiritual awareness. The moment you start practicing this recognition of truth over appearance, you'll notice something profound about time itself. Every spiritual problem you've ever experienced exists only when your mind leaves the present moment. Think about it right now, in this exact second. Strip away all the mental commentary about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. Strip away the stories about what your problem means, where it came from, or how bad it could get. In this pure present moment, where is the actual problem? You're alive right now. You're breathing. You're conscious and aware. Whatever crisis your mind wants to rehearse exists either in past regret or future anxiety, but it doesn't exist in this precise moment of now. Joel Goldsmith taught that Christ consciousness is only accessible in the present, because the present is the only place that actually exists. Everything else is mental projection. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He meant it's available right here, right now, in this moment. Not after you die, not after you prove yourself worthy, but in the eternal now that never leaves. This is where most spiritual seekers get confused. They think the practice of presence is about escaping from life's challenges or pretending problems don't exist, but it's actually the opposite. It's discovering where real life happens, which is always and only now. Pain might be present in this moment. Physical discomfort might be here. But suffering, the mental anguish we experience, requires thought about past or future. Suffering requires the mind to tell stories about what the pain means, how long it will last, what it says about you, or what terrible outcomes might follow. Now, understanding the power of presence leads us to something even more foundational that Joel discovered through decades of spiritual practice. Every problem you face, every challenge that seems insurmountable, every miracle you're desperately seeking stems from one single belief: the belief in separation. You believe you're separate from God, separate from the supply you need, separate from the healing you want, separate from other people who seem to have what you lack. Joel called this separation consciousness the only actual sin, not in the moral sense of wrongdoing deserving punishment, but in the original meaning of the word, missing the mark of truth. Traditional religion teaches forgiveness when someone wrongs you, which sounds noble but still reinforces the illusion that there are separate individuals in conflict with each other. Joel taught something far deeper that completely dissolves resentment at its root. There's no separate person to forgive, because there's only one divine consciousness appearing as many temporary forms. The person who betrayed you, hurt you, or disappointed you is divine consciousness temporarily forgetting itself, exactly as you sometimes forget your true nature. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior or mean you accept abuse. It removes the emotional charge that keeps you imprisoned by the past. When you recognize that everything you've been seeking exists right now in consciousness, and you've never actually been separate from it, the entire journey transforms. You're not pursuing abundance, health, or peace as external goals. You're recognizing they exist in your consciousness this very moment, and your work is simply allowing that recognition to become your lived experience. Type, "I'm not separate," if this principle of oneness is beginning to dissolve the illusion of lack in your awareness. Once you begin recognizing oneness instead of separation, you naturally move into what Joel called living by grace, and this is where the journey becomes both liberating and terrifying. Grace isn't God's mercy toward undeserving sinners. Grace is the automatic flow of divine good that operates the moment you stop trying to manipulate, control, and force outcomes through human effort. Every frantic attempt to make something happen comes from the deep belief that you're separate from Source, that if you don't hustle and scheme and strategize, nothing will work out. Living by grace means recognizing that Source is already supplying everything before you even ask. This sounds passive to the achievement-oriented mind, but it's actually the most active spiritual practice possible because it requires constant vigilance against your mind's compulsive need to take control and make things happen through sheer willpower. Joel Goldsmith himself proved this principle in the most practical way. He never advertised his lectures, never promoted his books, never marketed his ministry. He simply taught what he'd discovered, and thousands of people found their way to him across decades. Divine grace supplied every single thing that was needed without manipulation or effort. Your ego will rebel violently against this approach because it's built on the illusion that you must do something, must take charge, must ensure survival through constant action. But spiritual consciousness is always doing everything. Your work is getting out of the way and allowing grace to operate without interference. This requires a level of trust that feels impossible until you experience it working in your own life. Now, here's something crucial that nobody warns you about, and it's the reason many people abandon this practice right when it's about to break through. When you first start practicing Christ consciousness, when you shift from petition to recognition, from separation to oneness, from control to grace, your circumstances might actually get worse before they improve. This isn't failure. This is the transition, revealing everything that's been false in your life, so truth can replace it. Sarah practiced Joel's teaching faithfully for 3 months and watched her entire life disintegrate. Her marriage hit crisis point. Her business started failing. Her health declined. She called Joel in desperation, convinced she was doing something catastrophically wrong. His response shocked her. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Don't abandon the practice now. Go deeper into Christ consciousness. This is where most people quit. They return to begging God to fix the chaos, not understanding that consciousness is actually cleaning house, dismantling everything not built on spiritual truth. Sarah stayed with the practice, despite appearances suggesting total collapse. 6 months later, she looked back and saw with clarity that everything that fell apart absolutely needed to fall apart. The marriage that ended had been dead for years. The business that failed had drained her soul. The health crisis forced her to address patterns she'd been ignoring for decades. Joel's teaching hadn't caused the chaos. It had revealed what was already there beneath the surface, giving her the opportunity to rebuild from truth instead of continuing to build on false foundations. This transition period tests your commitment to truth over comfort, to spiritual reality over familiar appearances, and it's where the real transformation begins to take root in your consciousness. Comment, I trust the process if you're willing to stay faithful to recognition, even when circumstances seem to contradict what you're practicing. As you practice this shift in consciousness, you might encounter something frustrating. Certain patterns keep repeating despite your faithful practice. The same relationship dynamics surface with different people. The same financial struggles reappear in new forms. The same health issues cycle back after temporary improvement. Your mind screams that the practice isn't working, that maybe you're doing it wrong, or worse, that it's all nonsense. But Joel discovered that persistent patterns aren't evidence of failure. They're actually invitations to go deeper, to uncover hidden beliefs operating below your conscious awareness. Michael practiced recognizing abundance for years, yet poverty consciousness kept manifesting in his life no matter how diligently he meditated or how sincerely he recognized spiritual supply. One day, during a particularly deep meditation, the hidden belief finally surfaced into awareness. He believed that truly spiritual people should be poor to prove they're not materialistic, that wanting financial success somehow made him less devoted to God. This belief had been installed by years of religious conditioning, operating completely outside his conscious awareness, sabotaging every financial demonstration he tried to make. The moment he saw this unconscious belief clearly, he could recognize it as false. Spiritual consciousness knows nothing of poverty or wealth. Those are human concepts, with no reality in the divine realm. Within months of releasing that hidden belief, Michael's entire financial situation transformed, not because he hustled harder or got lucky, but because the internal block had been removed and consciousness could flow naturally. This is why brutal honesty with yourself becomes essential. You can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Every persistent problem in your life is pointing to a belief you don't know you're holding, inviting you to bring it into the light, where truth can dissolve it. Now, the ultimate expression of this practice, the place where all this spiritual understanding leads, is what Joel called becoming transparent consciousness. This isn't about achieving some special status or becoming spiritually superior to others. It's about becoming so established in Christ consciousness, so clear of personal agenda and ego-driven motivation, that divine consciousness can operate through you without obstruction. After decades of practice, Joel reached a state where he would simply sit in a room and be present, and people reported physical healings, emotional breakthroughs, and spiritual awakenings. He wasn't doing anything to them in the traditional sense. He wasn't praying for them, laying hands on them, or performing rituals. His consciousness had become so transparent to truth that anyone in his presence could feel the resonance of that clarity. Situations would resolve when he entered them. Peace would descend on chaotic environments. This is the same state Jesus demonstrated, and it's not reserved for special people or ancient prophets. It's available to you through persistent recognition of what's already true. You don't achieve transparency through effort. You achieve it by continuously releasing everything false, until only truth remains. And that process happens naturally as you practice presence day after day, year after year. Right? I'm becoming transparent if you're committing to this journey of letting everything false fall away until only truth remains. If you're still here with me, you've just taken a journey that most people will never experience because they're too comfortable with the familiar cage of traditional religious thinking. What we've explored today isn't just information. It's transformation waiting to happen in your life the moment you begin practicing recognition over petition, presence over absence, oneness over separation. This channel exists to bring you these hidden truths that have been buried under centuries of institutional control, to give you practical spiritual tools that actually work when you apply them. If this resonates with you, if you want to continue exploring the mysteries that change everything about how you experience reality, hit that subscribe. button. There's so much more to uncover together, and I'm committed to bringing you content that shifts consciousness, not just fills time. Drop a comment right now saying, "This was meant for me," so I know you made it all the way through. I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your commitment to this path publicly. It anchors the decision in your consciousness. And if this video opened doors in your awareness that have been locked for years, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are ready for it, people who are tired of begging and ready to start recognizing. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into how to dissolve the blocks that keep miracles from manifesting instantly in your experience. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've learned today is just the beginning of understanding how spiritual law actually operates in your life.
Most people pray desperately for years, begging an external God for help, wondering why their prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling. Joel Goldsmith discovered the shocking truth that revolutionized spiritual healing. We've been praying backwards. The divine isn't outside waiting to be convinced. It's the very consciousness through which you pray. Traditional prayer treats God like a cosmic vending machine. Insert enough devotion, pull the right lever of righteousness, and expect your miracle to drop down. But Goldsmith revealed that this approach actually blocks the very healing power you're seeking. When you beg, you affirm lack. When you plead, you strengthen the problem. The secret isn't asking God to change your circumstances. It's recognizing that God consciousness is already your consciousness, and from that awareness, circumstances naturally align with wholeness. This isn't positive thinking or wishful hoping. It's spiritual law operating through awakened awareness. Imagine discovering that what you've been seeking outside yourself has been the very essence of your being all along. Tonight, you'll learn to pray from this revolutionary understanding that transformed thousands of lives and can transform yours too. Joel Goldsmith spent decades in spiritual search before his illumination came, not through more seeking, but through a moment of complete surrender. In deep meditation, he realized he was trying to become what he already was. The healing presence he'd been praying to was the same consciousness experiencing the prayer. This revelation shattered his entire approach to spiritual practice. Instead of reaching upward for God, he discovered God as the very awareness reading these words right now. Not a distant deity requiring appeasement, but the intimate presence closer than your breath, more immediate than thought itself. From this awakened recognition, Goldsmith began practicing what he called the prayer of recognition rather than petition. Instead of "please heal me," the prayer became, "I recognize the wholeness that I am." Instead of asking for supply, recognizing the infinite source as consciousness itself expressing as abundance. This shift from seeking to recognizing created instantaneous changes in his life and the lives of thousands he taught. Physical healings, financial demonstrations, relationship harmonies, all flowing from this fundamental reversal of spiritual understanding. The prayer of recognition operates on a completely different frequency than petitionary prayer. When you recognize divine wholeness as your true nature, you're not trying to get something from God. You're allowing God to be God as you. This removes the resistance that blocks manifestation in traditional prayer. Think of it like tuning a radio. Petitionary prayer is like shouting at a radio that's on the wrong frequency, demanding it play your favorite station. The prayer of recognition simply tunes to where the music is already playing. The broadcast never stopped. You just found the right frequency. Goldsmith taught that every seeming problem exists only in the realm of appearances, like shadows cast by objects blocking light. When you recognize the light of consciousness, shadows automatically disappear. You don't fight the shadow. You simply turn on the light and reveal what was always true. This isn't about convincing yourself that problems don't exist. It's about recognizing the divine reality that exists regardless of appearances, then watching appearances align with that recognition. Truth doesn't overcome error. It reveals error as having no real existence. Here's the exact technique Goldsmith used that you can begin practicing tonight. Sit quietly and instead of presenting your problem to God, recognize, divine consciousness is my consciousness now. Feel this not as a hope or belief, but as recognition of what's already true in this moment. When thoughts of the problem arise, don't fight them or deny them. Simply return to recognition. Perfect wholeness is expressing as my life now. You're not trying to create wholeness, you're recognizing the wholeness that can never be absent from consciousness, which is what you are. Practice this for even 5 minutes daily, and you'll notice something remarkable. The desperate energy of needing things to change dissolves into peaceful recognition of what's eternally perfect. From this inner shift, outer circumstances begin reflecting the harmony you've recognized within. This isn't magic or mysticism, it's spiritual law. Consciousness appears as experience, and as you recognize divine consciousness as your consciousness, your experience naturally reflects that divinity. Tonight, you begin praying from the answer rather than from the problem. Sarah had prayed for her marriage for 3 years using every technique she knew, petitions, bargaining, even attempting to visualize her husband changing. Their relationship continued deteriorating until she discovered Goldsmith's approach, and everything shifted within weeks, not through changing him, but through her recognition. Instead of praying, "Please fix my marriage," Sarah began recognizing, divine love is expressing as this relationship now. She stopped seeing her husband as someone who needed to change and started seeing him through the eyes of recognition, as divine consciousness appearing as her beloved partner. The transformation was remarkable. Without any outer action or conversation about their problems, her husband began responding differently. The critical voice softened, the emotional distance closed, intimacy returned naturally as Sarah maintained her recognition of their divine unity despite temporary appearances. This wasn't about denial or pretending problems didn't exist. Sarah still addressed practical matters when necessary, but she approached everything from recognition of wholeness rather than from fear of lack. Her prayer had shifted from trying to fix what seemed broken to recognizing what was never broken. Michael's business was failing after 20 years of success. Traditional prayers for financial rescue felt hollow and desperate. When he learned Goldsmith's method, he stopped asking for money and began recognizing divine abundance as consciousness itself, expressing through his business activities and relationships. Rather than seeing his challenges as evidence of divine absence, Michael recognized them as appearances in consciousness that had no power to limit infinite supply. He maintained recognition of abundance, even while taking practical steps like restructuring and reaching out to new clients. Within 2 months, unexpected opportunities emerged. A former competitor offered a partnership. Clients who had disappeared returned with larger projects. New revenue streams opened naturally. But Michael understood these weren't rewards for better praying. They were the natural expression of consciousness recognized as abundance. The business recovery taught Michael something profound about spiritual law. Divine supply isn't something consciousness provides. It's what consciousness is. When you recognize your consciousness as divine consciousness, supply appears as naturally as light appears when you flip a switch. Linda had suffered chronic pain for 5 years. Medical treatments provided temporary relief, but the pain always returned. Through Goldsmith's teaching, she learned to recognize divine wholeness as her true being, independent of the body's testimony. This wasn't denial of pain, but recognition of perfect life as consciousness. Each time pain arose, instead of fighting it or submitting to it, Linda returned to recognition. Perfect wholeness is my true nature now. She discovered that consciousness itself is never in pain. Only the body identified with limitation experiences discomfort. Gradually, the pain began losing its grip, not through force or positive thinking, but through consistent recognition of her divine nature. As her identity shifted from someone with chronic pain to consciousness expressing as perfect wholeness, the body began reflecting this inner recognition. 6 months later, Linda was completely pain-free, but more importantly, she had discovered her true identity as consciousness itself. Physical healing was simply the natural reflection of spiritual recognition. She had learned to pray not for healing, but from the wholeness that she recognized as her eternal truth. These transformation stories share one common thread: the shift from seeking divine intervention to recognizing divine presence as consciousness itself. Each person stopped trying to get something from God and began allowing God to be God as them. This recognition created space for natural healing and harmony. The prayer of recognition works because it aligns with spiritual law rather than fighting against it. Consciousness appears as experience, and when you recognize divine consciousness as your consciousness, experience naturally reflects that recognition. This isn't hope or faith, it's understanding operating as demonstration. Tonight you can begin this revolutionary approach. Choose any situation that seems challenging, and instead of asking for change, recognize divine perfection as the truth of that situation now. Feel this recognition not as belief, but as the awareness that you are. Let this recognition be your prayer, or, if these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the basic prayer of recognition, Goldsmith taught complementary practices that deepen this spiritual understanding. The technique of listening takes you even further into the recognition of divine consciousness as your natural awareness. This isn't listening for voices or messages, but listening as consciousness itself. Sit quietly after your recognition practice and simply listen. Not for something to happen, but listen as the awareness in which all experience appears. In this listening, you discover the profound silence that underlies all activity, the eternal stillness that is consciousness aware of itself. This listening dissolves the sense of being a person having spiritual experiences and reveals the truth that you are consciousness itself in which all experiences arise and pass away. Problems exist only in the realm of experience, but you are the aware presence in which they appear. From this listening, solutions emerge naturally, not as mental answers, but as the spontaneous knowing that arises from consciousness itself. You don't receive guidance. You recognize that divine intelligence is the very awareness through which all knowing flows. This transforms decision-making from struggle to natural unfoldment. Another powerful complement to recognition is what Goldsmith called being a transparency. This means becoming so identified with consciousness itself that your personal will dissolves into divine will. You're no longer trying to make things happen through spiritual practice. You become the space through which divine action flows. Being a transparency doesn't mean becoming passive or inactive. It means acting from recognition rather than from personal desire or fear. Every action becomes an expression of divine consciousness rather than an attempt to achieve personal goals. This removes resistance and allows natural harmony to emerge. Practice this throughout your day. Before speaking, recognize divine wisdom as the intelligence expressing through your words. Before acting, recognize divine love as the motivation behind your choices. You become a clear channel for consciousness to express its infinite nature through what appears as your life. This transparency transforms not only your experience but impacts everyone around you. When you're operating as consciousness rather than as a limited person, others feel the presence of that unlimited awareness. Healing and harmony occur naturally in the field of recognized divine presence. The practice of taking no thought represents Goldsmith's most advanced teaching. This isn't about stopping thinking or emptying the mind, but about recognizing that divine consciousness already knows everything that needs to be known. Your role is recognition, not figuring out solutions through mental effort. When faced with challenges, instead of analyzing problems or planning solutions, take no thought. Return to recognition of divine consciousness as your consciousness and trust that the intelligence that created the universe knows how to handle whatever appears in your experience. This requires tremendous faith initially, but as you practice, you discover that consciousness itself contains infinite intelligence. Solutions emerge naturally when you stop interfering with divine wisdom through personal thinking. What seemed like complex problems resolve through simple recognition of what's already perfect. Taking no thought liberates you from the exhaustion of trying to control life through mental effort. You discover that consciousness is self-governing, and when you recognize your consciousness as divine consciousness, your life flows with natural intelligence, grace, and perfect timing. This is living from the answer rather than wrestling with questions. These three complementary practices, listening, transparency, and taking no thought, work together to deepen your foundation in recognition. They're not separate techniques, but different expressions of the same truth. Divine consciousness is your consciousness now. Each practice reinforces this fundamental recognition from a different angle. Listening reveals consciousness as aware presence. Transparency reveals consciousness as expressing through action. Taking no thought reveals consciousness as infinite intelligence. Together, they transform your entire approach to living, from seeking solutions to recognizing the perfection that's always present. Start with whichever practice feels most natural and gradually incorporate the others. Some days listening may feel appropriate. Other times being a transparency serves the situation. Sometimes taking no thought provides the perfect response. Let consciousness itself guide which approach serves each moment. Remember, these aren't techniques to get something from God, but ways of recognizing what God is being as you right now. Every practice deepens your recognition that divine consciousness is not something you access. It's what you are. From this recognition, your entire life becomes a demonstration of divine presence. Many people struggle with doubt when first practicing recognition. If divine consciousness is my consciousness, why do I still experience problems? This question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding that blocks progress. Recognition doesn't eliminate appearances. It reveals what's true regardless of appearances. Doubt often arises because we expect recognition to immediately change outer circumstances. But consciousness appearing as experience includes all experiences, both harmonious and challenging. Recognition doesn't control appearances. It recognizes what remains perfect regardless of what appears in experience. When doubt arises, don't fight it or feel like you're failing spiritually. Simply recognize doubt as another appearance in consciousness. Divine consciousness is perfectly present even when doubt appears. The recognition of perfection remains true whether you feel it or not. This understanding frees you from the pressure of maintaining positive feelings or spiritual experiences. Recognition is not a feeling or state, it's the truth of consciousness itself. Whether you feel connected or disconnected, divine consciousness remains your consciousness. This removes the burden of spiritual performance. Another common obstacle is trying to use recognition to manipulate outcomes. The mind thinks, if I recognize abundance enough times, money will appear. This approach turns recognition into a sophisticated form of petition, which blocks the very flow it seeks to create. True recognition has no agenda for outer change. You recognize divine perfection because it's true, not because you want circumstances to improve. This pure recognition without motive creates the inner space where natural harmony can emerge without resistance or manipulation. When you catch yourself using recognition to get results, gently return to recognizing for its own sake. Divine consciousness is infinitely worthy of recognition, regardless of what it produces in experience. This worship-like recognition dissolves the manipulation that blocks natural demonstration. The paradox is that recognition without agenda often produces the most dramatic outer changes, while recognition with agenda typically produces struggle and frustration. Let recognition be its own reward, and you'll discover that consciousness naturally expresses as the harmony, abundance, and wholeness that you are. Impatience represents another significant challenge. The mind wants to see results quickly and interprets delays as evidence that recognition isn't working. But consciousness operates according to divine timing, not human impatience. Your role is recognition. Timing belongs to infinite intelligence. Some demonstrations appear quickly, others unfold gradually, and some involve experiences that initially seem contrary to your prayers. Divine consciousness sees the bigger picture that personal perspective cannot perceive. Trust the intelligence that governs galaxies to handle the timing of your experience. Impatience often masks a subtle lack of faith in the perfection of what's unfolding. When you truly recognize divine consciousness as your consciousness, you trust that whatever appears is consciousness knowing and expressing itself perfectly, even when appearances seem challenging or delayed. Use impatience as a call to deeper recognition. Instead of wondering why things haven't changed yet, recognize the divine perfection of this moment, including your impatience. This transforms waiting from frustration into recognition, and recognition creates the inner space where natural timing can unfold without resistance. The final major obstacle is spiritual pride, the subtle satisfaction of feeling more evolved or enlightened than others because you practice recognition. This pride actually blocks the humility necessary for deep recognition and creates separation where unity should be recognized. True recognition reveals that consciousness is the same in everyone. The divine presence you recognize as your consciousness is identical to the divine presence appearing as every person you meet. Recognition dissolves the illusion of spiritual superiority and reveals universal divine identity. When spiritual pride arises, recognize it as consciousness appearing as the experience of pride. Don't judge it or try to eliminate it, but include it in your recognition of divine consciousness expressing in all forms. This dissolves pride naturally and returns you to authentic recognition. These obstacles, doubt, manipulation, impatience, and pride, are natural parts of the spiritual journey. They're not evidence of failure, but opportunities for deeper recognition. Each challenge invites you to recognize divine perfection even in imperfect appearances, which deepens your understanding of consciousness itself. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to maintain recognition during daily activities rather than limiting it to meditation periods. This transforms ordinary moments into continuous spiritual practice. Washing dishes becomes recognition of divine consciousness, expressing as cleanliness and order. Driving becomes recognition of consciousness appearing as movement and direction. The key is remembering that consciousness is indivisible. The same awareness present during formal spiritual practice is present during every mundane activity. You don't need to feel spiritual or peaceful to practice recognition. Consciousness remains perfect regardless of the activity or emotion appearing within it. Start with simple activities. While cooking, recognize divine consciousness as nourishment and care. While working, recognize consciousness as intelligence and creativity expressing through your tasks. This gradually dissolves the separation between spiritual practice and daily living. As recognition becomes natural during routine activities, you'll discover that your entire life becomes a meditation. Every moment offers the opportunity to recognize divine consciousness expressing itself as whatever appears. This transforms living from a secular experience to a continuous spiritual practice. Relationship challenges provide powerful opportunities for advanced recognition practice. Instead of seeing others as separate people who need to change, recognize divine consciousness as the true identity of everyone you encounter. This doesn't deny personality differences but recognizes the underlying unity. When someone triggers anger or frustration, instead of reacting from personality, recognize divine consciousness appearing as both your experience and their expression. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, but responding from recognition rather than from personal reaction. Practice seeing through appearances to divine reality. The difficult boss is consciousness appearing as authority. The challenging spouse is consciousness appearing as intimate relationship. The annoying neighbor is consciousness appearing as community. This recognition transforms relationships from personality conflicts to spiritual opportunities. Advanced practitioners discover that as they consistently recognize divine consciousness in others, others naturally begin expressing more harmoniously. Not because you've manipulated them, but because recognition creates a field of consciousness in which harmony is the natural expression. Your recognition of their divinity calls forth their divinity. Financial challenges offer another arena for advanced recognition practice. Instead of seeing money as scarce resources requiring careful management, recognize abundance as consciousness itself, expressing as infinite supply. This doesn't encourage financial irresponsibility, but transforms your relationship with material resources. Practice recognizing consciousness as abundance in every financial interaction. Paying bills becomes recognizing divine circulation. Earning money becomes recognizing consciousness, expressing as value exchange. Even financial challenges become opportunities to recognize the infinite nature of consciousness appearing as supply. Advanced practitioners understand that true supply is consciousness itself. Money, food, shelter, and resources are appearances of infinite abundance in material form. When you recognize consciousness as abundance, resources appear naturally to meet every need without struggle or anxiety. This recognition liberates you from financial worry and scarcity consciousness. You still handle money responsibly and make practical decisions, but from recognition of abundance rather than fear of lack. This inner shift often produces dramatic improvements in outer financial circumstances. Health challenges provide the most profound opportunities for recognition practice. Instead of seeing the body as a physical mechanism requiring medical intervention, recognize consciousness as perfect wholeness, expressing as your embodied experience. This complements medical care rather than replacing it. Practice recognizing divine consciousness as the life that animates your body. Recognize consciousness as the intelligence that governs every cell, organ, and system. When symptoms appear, recognize them as appearances in consciousness that have no power to limit or define your divine wholeness. Advanced recognition sees through the appearance of illness to the perfect wholeness that consciousness is. This doesn't deny symptoms or ignore medical guidance, but maintains recognition of spiritual truth regardless of physical appearances. Many practitioners experience profound healing through this recognition. The deepest recognition reveals that you are not a body having consciousness, but consciousness appearing as embodied experience. From this recognition, the body naturally reflects the wholeness, vitality, and perfect life that consciousness is. Health becomes the natural expression of recognized spiritual identity. After months or years of consistent practice, recognition becomes so natural that you rarely remember living any other way. The person who used to pray desperately for change has dissolved into consciousness, recognizing itself as the very wholeness that was being sought. This is spiritual maturity. From this established recognition, life flows with remarkable ease and grace. Challenges still appear, but they're met with immediate recognition rather than personal reaction. Solutions emerge naturally because you're living from the intelligence of consciousness itself, rather than from limited personal perspective. Others notice the transformation even when you don't mention spiritual practice. There's a quality of presence, peace, and natural wisdom that emanates from someone established in recognition. You become a blessing wherever you go because consciousness recognizes itself through your presence. This maturity brings deep gratitude for the journey, including all the challenges that deepened recognition. You understand that every difficulty was consciousness creating opportunities for deeper self-recognition. Nothing was ever wrong. Everything served the awakening that you now embody. The ultimate recognition reveals that there was never anyone practicing recognition and nothing to be recognized. There is only consciousness being itself as the totality of experience. The seeker, the practice, and the sought are all appearances of the same divine consciousness that you are. This final recognition doesn't eliminate the person but reveals the person as consciousness appearing as individual expression. You continue living, working, and relating, but from the understanding that all experience is consciousness knowing itself in infinite ways. This is true non-duality. From this understanding, every moment becomes perfect exactly as it is, not because circumstances are always pleasant, but because you recognize all experience as consciousness expressing its infinite nature. Joy and sorrow, success and failure, health and illness, all equally divine consciousness and appearance. This doesn't create indifference or passivity. You continue caring, acting, and responding to life, but from the recognition that consciousness itself is living as all experience. Love becomes natural because you recognize yourself as the consciousness appearing as everyone and everything you encounter. Living from ultimate recognition transforms your impact on the world. You become a presence of peace, healing, and awakening wherever you go. Not through doing special spiritual things, but through being established in the recognition of what you are. Consciousness blesses itself through your recognition. Others are naturally drawn to this presence even if they don't understand why. You become a magnet for those ready for deeper spiritual understanding. Your conversations naturally turn to truth because consciousness recognizes itself and seeks to awaken itself through every encounter. This influence happens effortlessly because you're no longer trying to help or heal anyone. You simply live from recognition, and that recognition creates a field where others naturally remember their own divine nature. Your greatest service is being established in truth rather than doing spiritual work. The ripple effect extends far beyond your personal interactions. Every moment of recognition contributes to the awakening of human consciousness. You discover that your individual recognition was never separate from universal recognition, consciousness awakening to itself through the appearance of your life journey. Tonight you've discovered the secret that Joel Goldsmith spent his lifetime sharing. Prayer works when you stop praying from the problem and begin praying from the answer. Divine consciousness is your consciousness now. This isn't a hope or belief. It's the recognition that transforms everything. You now understand why most prayers never get answered. They're asked from separation rather than from unity. The divine presence you've been seeking outside yourself is the very awareness through which you've been seeking. Recognition ends the search and begins the demonstration of what you've always been. Tomorrow morning, instead of asking God to fix your life, recognize divine consciousness as your consciousness and watch how differently your day unfolds. This isn't magic. It's spiritual law operating through awakened awareness. Your recognition creates space for natural harmony to emerge. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.
Now, let us begin. There comes a moment in every spiritual life when the familiar ground beneath our feet gives way, and we find ourselves standing upon an entirely different foundation than the one we had trusted before. And it was such a moment, quiet, unannounced, without thunder or lightning, that changed the entire course of my life and became the beginning of what you now call the infinite way. I did not arrive at it through years of study, nor through any superior discipline of the mind. It was given in a way that defies explanation, and yet its truth has proven itself over and over again in every corner of human experience. And the revelation was simply this: you never had a problem? Not that your problems were solved, not that they were diminished, not that they were made easier to bear, but that in the light of spiritual reality, they had never existed as powers, as forces, as actualities. You see, the world is forever teaching us to examine, to analyze, to resist, and to wrestle with appearances, and because of this, we come to believe that a problem is something outside ourselves, pressing upon us, demanding our energy, our strength, our ingenuity. But the truth that came in that sacred moment revealed a very different picture. It showed that what we have been calling problems are nothing more than shadows cast by a false belief, a belief in a power apart from God, a presence that is not the presence. And the moment that belief is dissolved in the recognition of one power, one presence, one life, the shadow disappears, for it never had substance of its own. I would like you, as we begin this time together, to let this truth rest gently upon your consciousness. Do not try to grasp it with the intellect, for the intellect will immediately protest, will demand explanations and proofs and logical demonstrations. Do not engage it on that level. Simply listen, quietly, as though you were listening to a breeze moving across the surface of still water. Let it be an impartation, for the revelation that you never had a problem is not something to be reasoned out. It is something to be perceived inwardly, spiritually, silently. And if you will allow it, even now, something within you will begin to respond not to my words, but to the presence that stands behind the words, the presence that has no opposite. You may have come today burdened, perhaps with fear for the body, concern over supply, anxiety about time, or unrest over world events. These are the universal pressures that beset every individual born into the belief of material existence. But before we go one step further, let me assure you, the moment this truth dawns in you, the moment you sense even faintly that God is the only power operating in your life, something begins to loosen, to soften, to fall away, not because you have overcome a problem, but because you have recognized that there is no power opposing the infinite. And this simple, profound recognition is the beginning of all healing, all peace, all freedom. So let us go forward gently, reverently, with the awareness that we are not here to acquire something, nor to add something to ourselves, nor even to improve our human condition. We are here to awaken to what already is, what has always been, what will forever be, the unopposed, uninterrupted, ever-present activity of God as the very essence of our being. And when this is seen, truly seen, you will know as I came to know. You never had a problem. Let us look now, quietly and honestly, at what we call the human condition. For unless we understand what the world believes, we cannot perceive why the revelation "you never had a problem" is so transforming. When we speak of problems, we are not speaking of anything abstract or distant. We are speaking of the very storms that sweep through human life. Illness in the body, lack in the purse, pressure in the schedule, and the restless turbulence of world events. These are the experiences that seem to rise like waves and throw us off our center, and it is because humanity has accepted these waves as powers that the sense of fear persists. You see, the human mind is forever declaring its allegiance to what I call the four temporal kingdoms: the kingdom of the body, the kingdom of supply, the kingdom of time, and the kingdom of external forces. Each one claims dominion. Each one whispers its threats. Each one demands that you bow before it. And because the world has believed in these kingdoms for centuries, humanity has come to accept them as ultimate reality. When the body aches or falters, the world tells you that you are at the mercy of matter, that you are flesh and blood subject to decay, to laws that operate independently of God. When supply appears limited, the world insists that your security lies in bank accounts, in salaries, in opportunities that can be given or taken away by human hands. When time presses, the world convinces you that you are caught in a relentless march of hours and days, lacking the very substance you need to live your life. And when nations tremble, when headlines scream, when forces larger than yourself seem to shake the foundations of the earth, the world persuades you that you are a small being in a vast, uncontrollable universe. And because this is the universal belief, humanity suffers not from actual powers, but from the acceptance of these appearances as powers. Now listen carefully. This is the very atmosphere into which the spiritual message must come. This is the storm in which the Christ light must be recognized. The infinite way does not begin in peaceful gardens. It begins in the midst of the world's turbulence, in the very heart of the human turmoil. For it is precisely there that the false sense of power reveals itself, and precisely there that the presence within you declares itself as the only reality. When you feel fear in your body, or anxiety over your finances, or the weight of time, or dread over world conditions, it is not because there is an actual power acting upon you. It is because the mind has accepted a secondary power, a second presence, a rival to God. And it is this belief, and only this belief, that produces the storm. But remember this: the storm is never the truth. It is never the reality. It is an appearance, a shadow, cast by the belief in two powers. And when you turn from the appearance, even for a moment, and acknowledge within yourself that God is the only presence and the only power, the shadow begins to thin, to weaken, to dissolve. Not because you have fought it, not because you have resisted it, but because it cannot stand in the light of recognition. You may feel that your particular storm is unique, that others may find peace, but your situation is somehow different. Yet I tell you lovingly, gently, firmly, there is no storm that has authority over the one who abides in the secret place of the Most High. There is no condition that can impose itself upon the one who has awakened to the principle of oneness. And it is this principle, this eternal truth, that begins to dawn in us when we understand the nature of the human condition and the unreality of the powers it claims. So we look upon these storms not with fear, not with resistance, not with desperate prayer, but with the quiet assurance that whatever has a beginning in human belief must have an ending in spiritual realization. And in that assurance, we begin to glimpse the light behind the clouds. We begin to sense that the one who walks through the storms of the world is untouched by them. We begin to hear, perhaps faintly at first, the whisper of the inner voice saying, "Be not afraid, it is I." And from this recognition, the journey begins. And now, having looked at the storms that human experience brings, let us turn to a moment in my own journey that became the gateway to the revelation we are exploring together. For spiritual truth, as you know, rarely breaks upon us in times of ease. It comes when every human refuge has been exhausted, when even our most cherished methods no longer function, when the mind reaches a point of helplessness. And it was precisely in such a moment that the infinite way found its birth. For many years I had been serving as a practitioner, receiving calls from morning until night from the ill, the fearful, the lonely, the troubled. They came seeking help. And the remarkable thing was that help often came, healings occurred, discord dissolved, harmony appeared. Yet even in the midst of this activity, there was a gnawing question, a subtle dissatisfaction. Why do the same problems return? Why does the individual who has been healed of disease now return with lack? Why does the one delivered from fear now appear with resentment or guilt? What is it that keeps the wheel of human suffering in motion? You see, I had come to a point where the repetition itself was speaking louder than the individual cases. It was as if life were saying, "You are not yet touching the principle. You are still dealing with effects." And there arose within me a deep, nearly overwhelming weariness, not a physical weariness, but a spiritual hunger that no amount of successful demonstration could satisfy. For I began to sense that as long as one is working with conditions, one is still on the surface of life, still moving pieces upon a board without touching the invisible cause behind them. There came a day when the calls felt heavier than ever, not because of their number, but because I could no longer bear the illusion that anything external needed healing. I could no longer believe that supply or health or relationship or circumstance had any inherent power to disturb or to restore. And yet, lacking the principle that explained this, I found myself in a kind of inner darkness, a silence in which all my old methods failed me. The prayers I had known were empty. The affirmations were lifeless. Even the scripture felt flat, as though the spirit had withdrawn its light. Now, understand this. Such a moment is not a punishment, not a sign of failure, but a sacred threshold. When the mind reaches its limit, when all personal effort is spent, when the human sense of self stands stripped of its tools and formulas, then only then does one become receptive to the impartation of the Spirit. And so it was in that quiet desperation, in that profound helplessness, that a spontaneous prayer arose from the depths of my being. It was not a prayer of words. It was not even a prayer addressed to God as something apart. It was a simple, silent yearning. Father, show me the principle. Show me what stands behind healing, behind harmony, behind all true activity. And in that moment of surrender, a stillness came, not the stillness of fatigue, but the stillness that precedes revelation. I knew nothing, yet I felt everything. I expected nothing, yet something within me recognized that the answer was already present. There was no struggle, no pleading, no mental reaching. There was only a vast, open receptivity. And into that receptivity, the light began to dawn. I did not know it then, but I had been brought to the threshold of truth by the very crisis I sought to avoid. Human insufficiency had become the doorway to spiritual vision. The failure of personal effort had prepared the mind to receive that which cannot be given through thought. And it was there, in that inner emptiness, that the revelation would come not as a thought to be remembered, but as a living presence to be known. We come now to that moment, and now we come to that sacred moment, the moment when the veil thinned and the truth that had been seeking me broke through, not with fanfare, not with excitement, but with the quiet certainty of something eternally present, waiting only to be recognized. I had laid down every tool, every method, every attempt to bring about a healing. I had released even the desire to know how truth works. And into that silence, into that emptiness, into that great yielding, the revelation came not as words, not as a teaching, but as an inner certainty so clear that no argument of the world could ever again shake it. The revelation was simply this: there is no problem. That which you have been trying to heal, to correct, to solve, does not exist as an entity, as a condition, as a power. It exists only as a belief in something other than God, in a presence apart from the presence, in a force that stands outside the one. And the instant this was seen, deeply and wholly, the entire structure of human fear collapsed. For if God is infinite, if God is all, if God is the only presence and the only power, then there is no place where a second power can stand. There is no room for disease. There is no room for lack. There is no room for fear. They are appearances, nothing more. It was as though I had been standing in a darkened room, attempting to push the darkness out through the window, trying desperately to sweep it away, only to discover that the moment a light is lit, the darkness cannot remain, not because it has been defeated, but because it never had substance. Darkness is not a thing. It is the absence of something. So too with every human problem. They are not things to be solved. They are the absence of the realization of one power. In that moment I understood why the problems returned, why the healings were temporary, why the same fears reappeared in new forms. I had been attempting to deal with shadows, and when one shadow is removed, another can appear, so long as we continue to believe that shadows possess form or force. But once you see that the shadow has no life apart from the light that casts it, you cease to deal with shadows altogether. You turn toward the light, and the light in this case is the living realization of God as the only presence, the only power, the only life, the only substance, the only cause. Once this is seen, even faintly, the so-called problem dissolves, not through effort, but through the simple impossibility of standing where it has no foundation. You are not overcoming anything. You are not resisting anything. You are not changing anything. You are merely recognizing what already is, that nothing exists that can oppose the infinite. This revelation did not come as an intellectual conclusion. It was not the result of reasoning. It was an impartation, a direct knowing from within. And with it came the immediate understanding that all spiritual healing rests upon this one principle: there is only God. Everything that appears as a problem, a condition, a discord, is merely the belief that something else has power. And the moment that belief is surrendered, the appearance fades. Now, I want you to hear this gently. The problem you face today, whatever its name, whatever its form, whatever fear it evokes, has no power. It has no law to support it. It has no life to sustain it. It has no substance to uphold it. It is a shadow, an appearance, a suggestion. And the instant you turn from the appearance to the one, the instant you acknowledge within yourself that God alone is the problem begins to dissolve in the light of your recognition. This is the revelation that changed everything. This is the foundation of the infinite way. And this is the truth that begins to set you free, not by solving your problems, but by revealing that they were never real to begin with. And now, let us look more deeply at the principle that stood revealed in that sacred moment. For without understanding this principle, spiritual healing remains a mystery, a hope, a possibility, but never a certainty. But once the principle is known, truly known, healing becomes as natural as the rising of the sun. Not because you perform it, but because you align yourself with the nature of reality. The principle is this: there is one power, one presence, one life, one substance, and beside this one there is none other. Now, this may seem like a familiar statement, for nearly all spiritual traditions affirm the oneness of God, but I tell you, few truly understand what it means to proclaim that God is one. For if God is one, and if God is all, then there cannot be God in disease. There cannot be God in lack. There cannot be God in fear. There cannot be God and a human mind with power to oppose the infinite. There cannot be two powers. In fact, the moment you entertain two powers, you step out of spiritual reality and into the realm of illusion. You see, every problem in human experience rests upon this one false belief. The belief that something other than God has presence, has activity, has law, has substance. And this belief is universal. It is the atmosphere of the world. It is the hypnotism that envelops mankind. But it is only a belief, no more than a dream that claims substance until the dreamer awakens. When the revelation came that you never had a problem, it was not saying that the appearance does not exist on the human level. The shadow on the wall exists as a shadow. The storm exists as a storm. But they do not exist as powers. They do not exist as causes. They do not exist as realities that can oppose the one. The entire weight of their seeming force is born from the acceptance of a second presence, from believing that there is something other than God that can influence your life. Now, listen carefully. The healing comes not when the body changes, not when the supply appears, not when the circumstance resolves. The healing comes when consciousness recognizes that only God is, and that recognition removes the belief in a second power. And when the belief is gone, the appearance has no foothold in your experience. It must dissolve, for its only life was the belief you held about it. This is why spiritual healing is not an act performed by a practitioner. It is not the application of truth to a condition. It is not the manipulation of invisible forces. Healing occurs when the practitioner rests in the realization of one presence, one power, one life, one law, and in that atmosphere of realized oneness, the false sense of discord cannot persist. Let me put it another way. If God fills all space, where is there room for anything unlike God? If God is the life of your being, what power can endanger that life? If God is your substance, what can diminish your supply? If God is the law of your existence, what external circumstance can legislate against that law? If God is your consciousness, what thought can separate you from your source? When you begin to see this not as a statement of faith, not as a creed, but as a living perception, you will understand why Joel Goldsmith never healed a disease, never lifted a burden, never corrected a condition. He recognized that no such thing existed in the presence of the One. And it was this recognition, this pure awareness of God as all that dissolved the appearance of error in the lives of those who called for help. So take this into your heart. One power is all you need to know. The moment your consciousness embraces the truth of one, the moment it yields even slightly to the allness of God, the appearance of two begins to fade, and with it, the belief in the problem fades as well. You are not overcoming, you are not resisting, you are not solving, you are recognizing. And in that recognition lies the entire secret of spiritual healing, spiritual peace, and spiritual freedom. Now, having touched the principle itself, let us come down gently into the landscape of daily living, for unless a spiritual truth can be lived, it remains only a beautiful idea, soaring perhaps, but without roots in experience. And yet, the marvel of this revelation is that it applies just as fully to the smallest detail of your day as it does to the great turning points of your spiritual journey. For the one that is God is not sometimes present and sometimes absent. The one does not appear in holy moments only to withdraw when the ordinary tasks of living arise. No, the same presence that dissolves fear in meditation walks with you as you prepare a meal, as you answer the telephone, as you sit quietly in a room alone. And it is in these ordinary moments that the realization of one power begins to take form in your practical, lived experience. Let us look, then, at the four temporal kingdoms, again, not as forces that bind you, but as opportunities to practice the awareness of the one. When the body signals discomfort, the world shouts, "This is power, this is law, this is reality." Yet, in the light of the principle, you pause. You do not fight the sensation. You do not run for remedies in fear. You do not declare affirmations in desperation. You simply remember, there cannot be God and this. And quietly, without struggle, you rest in the recognition that the life which animates the body is perfect, spiritual, untouched. And in that resting, something shifts not in the body first, but in consciousness. And because consciousness is the cause, the body follows. Then supply, a bill arrives, a job changes, an unexpected expense appears. Instantly the world insists, see, you are dependent on external sources. You are at the mercy of circumstances, but you know now that supply is not money, not employment, not opportunity. Supply is the activity of God expressing itself as your life. So you turn inward not to ask, not to plead, but to acknowledge there is only God, and God is my sufficiency in all things. And then you go about your day without fear, without hurry, without mental calculation. And in that atmosphere, the outer supply arranges itself not by your manipulation, but by the law of harmony inherent in the one. Consider time. How many are enslaved by the clock, rushed, pressured, overwhelmed? Yet time is only a concept useful on the human level, but powerless over the spiritual being. When you feel hurried, you pause, even for a single breath, to remember that the eternal is your life, that the now is infinite, spacious, complete. And in that remembrance, time bends, tasks unfold smoothly. What seemed impossible becomes effortless, not because you have mastered time, but because you have stepped out of the belief that it masters you. And then the great kingdom of external forces, world events, political upheaval, economic turbulence, these seem to roar like mighty winds, demanding your fear, your reaction, your allegiance. But the moment you recognize that these forces are but shadows on the screen of collective belief, the moment you see that the one power remains untouched by human activity, you are freed, not detached, not indifferent, but centered, able to behold the world without being of it. Now, understand this. These applications are not techniques. They are not methods. They are the natural expression of the consciousness that knows one power only. And because this consciousness is your true identity, every opportunity to practice becomes an invitation not to fix your life, but to reveal its spiritual foundation. This is how the realization works in daily life, not by changing the outer world, but by revealing that the outer world never possessed the authority you imagined. As you rest more frequently in the awareness of the One, you find that problems lose their urgency. Events no longer dictate your peace. Circumstances no longer govern your inner state. You become, in the quietest and most natural way, transparent to the presence, and through that transparency, harmony appears as your experience. And so I say to you, begin gently. When the appearance arises, whether in body, supply, time, or world, do not rush to correct it. Pause, turn within, acknowledge the One, and let the realization dawn that there is nothing in all the universe that can oppose the infinite. This alone is the beginning of freedom. And now we come to the practice, not a practice in the human sense of techniques and exercises, but the practice that arises naturally when one begins to perceive the allness of God and the nothingness of appearances. For if the revelation is true, and it is, then the entire spiritual life consists not in doing, not in striving, not in shaping conditions according to desire, but in resting, listening, and recognizing. These three movements form the heart of the infinite way, and when understood, they open the door to the very presence that dissolves every appearance of discord. Let us take them one by one. First, resting. This resting is not physical relaxation, though that may accompany it. It is not the stillness of inactivity or the passivity that waits for external change. This resting is the inner posture of yielding every attempt to solve, to manipulate, to fix, to control. It is the profound recognition that I can of mine own self do nothing. And in that recognition, the mind loosens its grip on the problem, the emotions soften their tension, and the sense of personal responsibility dissolves. Resting means surrendering the belief that your welfare depends on human thought or human effort. It is the willingness to allow God to be God. Then, listening. This is the central act of spiritual life, and yet it is not listening for a voice, nor for instructions, nor for guidance in the usual sense. It is listening for the presence itself, the silent, living activity of God within your own being. This listening begins when thought grows quiet, when words cease, when all mental formulation is set aside. You do not come with petitions. You do not come with desires. You come empty, receptive, open, and in this emptiness, the inner ear awakens the capacity to perceive impressions that are not born of the human mind, but of the spirit. This listening, you see, is the prayer of the infinite way, for true prayer is not speaking to God, but allowing God to speak within you. And finally, recognizing. For after the resting, after the listening, there comes a moment often so gentle you might overlook it, when the truth reveals itself. It may come as a quiet certainty, a subtle warmth, a sense of release, or simply an awareness that peace is present. And in that awareness you recognize something, that God has always been here, that the presence has never departed, that the one power has never been threatened. In that instant, whether brief or long, whether dramatic or understated, the illusion of the problem is pierced, and the appearance begins to fall away, not through your effort, but through the recognition of truth. Now I would have you understand that this practice is not reserved for times of crisis. It is meant to be woven into the entire fabric of your day, brief pauses, moments of turning inward, times of quiet acknowledgement. You may stop for a single breath and simply say within yourself, "Thou art here," or "I and the Father are one," or no words at all, only the stillness that listens. In these small intervals, repeated many times, the consciousness becomes attuned, the inner senses sharpen, and the presence that seemed distant becomes the living atmosphere of your being. Do not imagine that you must achieve some special state. Do not imagine that long meditation is the pathway. No. Joel Goldsmith taught and lived the truth that frequent inner turning, short and sincere, brings far more realization than rare extended practices. It is the constancy, the sincerity, the returning again and again that opens consciousness to the infinite. And so, when the appearance of discord arises, you do not rush, you do not fear, you do not attempt to make truth do something. You simply rest, you listen, you recognize. And in that quiet recognition, you discover that God has already gone before you, that harmony is already established, that the solution is not forthcoming, it is present. This is the practice. This is the way. And if you will walk gently in this manner, you will find that the presence becomes a living reality, not only in meditation, but in the midst of your daily tasks. And the more it becomes real, the less the world's appearances can disturb your peace. You begin to live from the center. You begin to live by grace. And so, as this practice becomes a way of life, this resting, this listening, this quiet recognition, something within you begins to change. Not suddenly, perhaps, not with fireworks or dramatic signs, but with the steady surety of dawn spreading across the horizon. For the transformation we speak of is not an improvement of the human self, not a refinement of personality, not the development of spiritual powers. It is the gradual dissolving of the false sense of self, the vanishing of the belief that you are a being separate from God, striving to reach God. And in its place there emerges a new awareness, a new center of identity, a new way of seeing one that knows itself to be the transparency for the presence, the instrument through which the infinite expresses itself. When this begins to unfold, problems no longer present themselves as emergencies, events lose their capacity to shake you, circumstances lose their authority. You may still witness the forms of discord appearing around you. This world is full of appearances, but they do not enter you. They do not claim your belief. They do not govern the inner atmosphere of your being. For you have discovered that your peace does not depend upon what the world does or does not do. It depends only upon your recognition of the One. You will notice, as this transformation deepens, that your reactions soften. Where once you might have hurried, you now feel no haste. Where once you might have feared, a quiet confidence arises in its place. Where once you might have condemned, compassion now flows effortlessly. You do not try to be better. You do not strain to be spiritual. These qualities unfold naturally because they are not attributes of a human person. They are the nature of the presence living itself as you. And as this unfolds, you begin to sense a subtle, ongoing guidance, not a voice in the sense of human language, but a movement of intuition, a direct knowing that reveals itself at the exact moment it is needed. You may find that you are moved to go somewhere, to speak a word, to refrain from speaking, to act or not to act, not through planning, but through the effortless appearing of right action. This is the inner leading, the still small voice, the activity of God within your consciousness. And as you learn to trust it, you discover that life becomes harmonized, coordinated, organized by a wisdom far beyond your own. There will also be moments, perhaps many, when the old fears return, when the mind once again rushes to judge or to worry or to react. And in these moments, you do not condemn yourself, for condemnation belongs to the belief in two powers. Instead, you simply return to the practice, resting, listening, recognizing. You turn inward even for a breath, and acknowledge that all power is in the invisible, not in the appearance. And each return deepens the transformation. You see, the goal is not to eliminate appearances, nor to perfect the human scene. The goal is to live from the center, from the conscious awareness of the One. And when you do, the world around you begins to reflect that inner harmony, not because you have changed it, but because you have withdrawn your belief in the forces that once seemed to rule it. You come to understand what Jesus meant when he said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth." For the peace you experience now is not the result of conditions aligning themselves. It is the peace that comes from knowing that the presence is your life, your supply, your protection, your guide, and that nothing can separate you from the activity of God being itself as you. In this transformation, you cease trying to demonstrate truth, and truth begins to demonstrate itself. You stop trying to bring harmony into the world, and harmony begins appearing wherever you are. You stop trying to heal, and healing begins happening around you, not because you have done anything, but because you have become transparent to the One who is doing everything. This is what it means to live as one who knows not intellectually, not as theory, but as experience. You walk through the world quietly, gently, peacefully, carrying an atmosphere that others can feel, even if they cannot name it. Your presence lifts. Your silence blesses. Your being radiates the light of the Christ, not as a power you exert, but as the natural expression of who you are. This is the transformation. This is the fruit of the revelation. This is the life lived under grace. And now, as we come to the close of this time together, let us rest for a moment in the spirit of what has been revealed. For teachings, words, and explanations have their place, but it is the impartation behind them, the presence, that has been quietly moving in and through our consciousness, that is the true substance of this message. And if you have listened, not merely with the mind, but with that inner faculty that feels truth when it is spoken, then something in you has already begun to awaken, already begun to loosen its hold on the belief in two powers, already begun to sense that divine freedom which has always been your inheritance. Let me leave you with this gentle assurance. The revelation that came to me that you never had a problem was not given for me alone. It was not a private gift or a personal illumination. It was a universal truth. A principle as available to you as the air you breathe. And if you will allow it, if you will sit quietly with it, ponder it, or simply let it pass through your awareness like sunlight through a window, it will begin to work within you. It will begin to soften the hard edges of fear. It will begin to dissolve the urgency of worry. It will begin to reveal the unreality of every appearance that has claimed authority over you. You need not grasp it all at once. You need not become a master of it tomorrow. The infinite way is not a path of hurry, nor is it a path of struggle. It is a path of awakening, of unfolding, of gentle remembrance. And every step you take toward the realization of one power is supported by the very presence you seek. You are not walking alone. You are not striving to reach God. You are awakening to the truth that God has always been where you are. So as you go forward from this moment, carry with you not the weight of a teaching, but the simplicity of a single truth. There is only God. And whenever the appearance of a problem arises, in whatever form, you need not wrestle with it. You need not fear it. You need only turn inward, even for a breath, and acknowledge the presence of one power. Let that recognition be your refuge. Let that awareness be your practice. Let that truth be the ground upon which you stand. And if you will do this softly, sincerely, without strain, there will come a day, perhaps sooner than you imagine, when you too will discover that the problem you struggled with was never there. It was a shadow, a suggestion, a passing belief. And the moment the light of truth shone upon it, it dissolved into the nothingness from which it came. This is the invitation. This is the promise. This is the freedom that awaits you. Go now in the peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. Rest in the assurance of God's presence. Walk gently in the awareness of one power, and let the light of the Christ, which is your own true being, shine forth through you as blessing, as harmony, as peace. Thank you for this sacred time together.